All right. Um, so while we're eating and I'm swallowing, um, I'd like you to look at the handout that I gave you on the I, C values continuum. And let me just look at it real quick. I have several different versions. I forget when I said. Oh, yeah. Good. Okay. And so what I'd like you to do is kind of look at that, and with the pen, hopefully everyone has a pen or a pencil. On all the things that are on the left are more individualistic, and the things on the right are more collectivistic. And I've just given some examples of identity and family. Let me know if you have questions about what I've written. But what I'd like you to put is put an X on where you're at on that continuum most of the time, in most of the decisions. And generally, that X is going to represent a more typical representation, because we probably won't always choose that all the time in each of those areas. So just most of the time, where do you usually fall in each of those continuums? And if you have a question about what I mean by any of those, let me know, because I think some of them may be self-explanatory, but some of them might be a little... Everyone has one. Can I borrow this? This belongs to... Oh, no, someone's there.
Oh,
sorry.
no.
No?
I got an extra one because I'm late when you have ready a minute. So you can
Okay.
go and-
Yeah, well, I'm just going to look at it.
Yeah,
I can go
that's
back to
good.
you. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Where you fall in general in each of those, most of the time. And when you go through that, you can continue as I talk. As it says in the bottom, kind of add up all the, I's you have and all the C's you have. And that just means, like, if you go right down the middle, if you leaned more, toward the I, how many of those did you have? If you lean more toward the C, how many of those did you have? This is more an example of a more accurate description of individualism and collectivism. And very few, if anybody, is strictly, completely, or societies, individualistic and completely collectivistic. I mean, in our society, we understand the importance of the social good as well, right? And so when we talk about individual societies or families and collectivistic, what we're talking about is a general profile. Values that we share, but if you put those values side by side, which one will a certain family choose more often than not because of that value? So having a son or a daughter go away to college may be difficult if the family's more collectivistic. Right? I want the family. But that doesn't mean that that's not a struggle for that family. I mean, they probably also highly value the individual accomplishments of their children. But that one decision to move away from the family for a long time may be one too much. And so all you're going to hear is like, we don't want him to leave. They need to be with us. And what we hear is like, oh, they're kind of blocking their child's accomplishments, or they're very collectivistic. And that may be the ultimate result, but what we may not hear, if we're not open to it, is the struggle that family's having with that. Because they may probably do also value their child's accomplishments, their individual accomplishments, and their intelligence, or their ingenuity, all of that. What we usually see and base our results and our reactions on is the end result. And then we think of it as an either or. Anybody remember statistics a little bit? Remember what a nominal statistic is as opposed to an ordinal? Nominal is just like boy or girl, or it's like one or the other. And a lot of the times when we're talking about values, it's not that way. It's not one or the other. It's more of a continuum. So look at your X's and your X's of your I's and C's, count them up, and then at the bottom, I want you to do what a lot of assessments do. There's always a profile, right? You're like introvert or extrovert. What I'd like you to do is name your own profile. Look at what it is, and what would you call your profile? Whatever you want to call it. Based on where you fall. How would you describe your psychological identity profile? What would you call it? What would you name it? Now, based on where we live and when we live, I'm going to make the assumption that most of us here had more X's that lean toward the I's, which would make sense. I would actually be very surprised if there was someone here where most of them lean toward the C's. It's possible. Anyone have most of your X's lean toward the C's? One? Anybody else? Two? Half raising and half raising. No. And so, right, so very, very few from this group, right, lean toward the C's. Now that you put that, I'm sorry, what's her name? Noelle. Now that you've put that down and you reflect, does it give you any insight into any parts of your life or decisions? And now that you can see that you're more towards the C's, does it help explain anything? You notice anything? Or were you pretty aware of that?
Yeah, I think I noticed some things, and I think that cultural trading is always fun for me.
Uh-huh.
Because I dance a lot of cultures, so
Uh-huh.
I think that it put a name to some of this stuff. Especially, I think what was helpful was the different categories, so work, school, family, identity. And so a lot of my identity stuff was more individualistic, but then the work, school, family pieces were
More collective, I think.
collective.
As anyone else looked at that, or as the rest of you looked at that, does anyone else have some insight into their own? What does it seem like to look at that? What does it say about you? You're not. Would you mind?
Oh, I had the same experience. Like, they were pretty equal,
Mm-hmm.
but the work, school, family was more towards collectivism, and identity, my personal, was more towards individualism.
Maybe that makes sense because of the field, right? A little bit, right? Yes.
I think for family, mine is just very individualistic, only because my family's really crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, move away from my family. That's what I believe.
Right.
If I had a normal family, I would for sure look at them, but I don't.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Right, and you know what? Making some assumptions like if you were to have a family, then there's going to be a decision. If you would prefer to stay close, the family that you have from here on forward, if that's something that you would like, and then is that a value that you're gonna try to promote, what you would prefer, or is something going to happen by unconsciously or consciously, where if you have children and their children, they're going to have more of an individualistic perspective of family. Here's where a shift.
My daughter's gonna live in that.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Anybody else looking at that? What did it say about some parts of who you are that maybe confirm something or maybe surprised you? Or you thought was interesting?
I can see for the family piece, at first I was like in the middle, but after thinking about it for like a minute longer, my family is very open. And we share everything about everybody's lives with everybody in the
Yeah.
family. And so I can see how it would be hard for like our spouses and
See, in terms of that.
yeah, to get to know that. And I think that's where a lot of our frustrations come
Yes.
with certain members of the family.
Yeah. And those are
But I
cultural
don't-
differences.
Yeah, I don't think that I really would have named it like this before.
Right.
Or
So,
identified it
helpful?
that way. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It doesn't change how we're going to act as a people.
Right. But, again, one of the ways maybe is that both spouses or partners and your family, the value that they share, one of the reasons why it's frustrating is because they also value family, just as you all do. But the way they express that, the way you value family is you respect their privacy maybe. I'm just adding words. Or you and that's how you show your love and respect for a family. And even when you have families that are open, you may continue and like that, but there's always positives and negatives within the values we all have. And so probably a difficulty to always being open is that everybody does know everybody's business. And so as much as that's closeness, it could also add certain struggles along the way. But same thing with someone that's very maybe private, one of the things that may not be as visible is not having that sharing and that connection. And so going through certain things more on their own when it's harder. I mean, I'm just putting examples out there, not necessarily your family. But one of the things I tried to do in that continuum as much as possible is some of them were harder, is try not to necessarily make them polar opposites again. Like, I think one place it says growth and change is valued, and in another place it says holding on to traditions is valued. If you value growth and change, if someone's the opposite in that, it doesn't mean they don't value growth and change. It might mean something different. It means that they value tradition more because there's maybe hundreds of years of history in a certain family of doing something a certain way that added to the richness of their family. And now we're going to come along, and now I'm a part of this family now, and I want to change all that. And that might be a little difficult. But it could. I mean, it changes. It shifts. And so when we're talking about the families we're working with and the values that they have, and the differences in identity, brought up as a good example, is they may have certain values along a continuum. And if they're running into a struggle or a problem, what they're going to tell you immediately is where they are different, either within the family or the kids, and they're going to tell you the outcome. They're not going to tell you, if you ask more on different parts of those decision makings, they may have come up with different decisions, or they may not be as complete polar opposite. So that's where you have to ask more about different examples when these decisions were made in different circumstances, different members of the family, and how strongly those values are held. Is that something that always occurs? Is that the decision that parents always come down on, or the child always comes down on? What are the exceptions to that? I'm very influenced by a lot of solution-focused ideas. I think it really does. I think it's really culturally responsive, and narrative ideas as well. So, what are the exceptions to that? And that's where you find the nuances. That's where you find the continuums. There's always a continuum. So now, especially those of you that in the work environment like collectivism, all of a sudden you are dealing with a lot of cultural conflicts within yourself and your work that you may not realize, because the field highly prizes individualism as health. Right? What is a healthy person? Someone that's autonomous, right? What's another thing to mental health well-being? Being self-aware, right? we don't think of that as a choice. We think of that as just, it just is. And that's inaccurate. It's what we value. And that's okay. And especially in this society, being self-aware is something that will help you probably connect and build relationships because that's what the society values. Right? But it's not just something that just is health. Right? It's something that is valued. Being reserved and being, what do you call that? Resistant is not seen as a positive sign, right? What we call resistant. It's seen as probably immaturity, right? Defensiveness. It's not seen as a healthy sign of preserving our integrity. Remember, even Freud believed the defense mechanisms were ultimately healthy, right? That's why he came up with them. They are healthy ways, healthy attempts at protecting our ego integrity, right? Yeah, but we forgot that somewhere along the way, most of us, and we see them as negative. Whether we see someone in terms of pathology or whether we see someone in terms of competence is more a matter of choice rather than a matter of truth.
So just to tell you a little bit about the type of therapy that we value here, we do a lot of attachment-based therapies, or just the way that we see families is the importance of meeting needs and eye contact and
Relational.
touch. Very relational. And so I was curious about this cultural conversation today and how you could inform us about how we need to be applying that and valuing different attachment styles that people may have.
Right. I think building on a relation, like the relational attachment, it can be really healthy. And I think for most of the clients, even those with different cultural backgrounds, would probably benefit. Now, where you would want to also kind of be open to questions is trying to find out from the families what looks like a close, valued, healthy relationship, even if it's not within their family. So if they're struggling, try to always evoking storytelling is really helpful. Family stories. So was there a grandmother, their mother, uncles, aunts, cousins that they saw as the model of what they would consider a close, healthy, supportive, loving family? And getting to the stories of what that was like and what those interactions were like and what that raising those children were like. And that can help tap into some examples that they have of what they would feel builds those connections.
So sort of like inherently knowing that they have that connection, and it just may not be the same as what we view that as, but within them, even if not their immediate family, that somewhere along the line there was that connection and tapping into that.
Tapping into that. Now the next step always is, what were the results, consequences of that? So they're giving you this example of this really healthy family that they wish they were, or that they, even if they don't say they wish they were, that's very vulnerable to admit that. But just kind of giving examples of other families that they think were healthy and good, and giving those stories. And so that also helps lower defensiveness, and it helps them not feel as vulnerable because you're not talking about them directly, and you get a chance to just, don't be too quick to just then bring it back to them. Just get those stories first. And then, okay, so that's what they feel is good and healthy. And then those children, in that relationship, you ask what that was like, what it looked like, how they interact, how they greet each other, all the things that may be important to attachment. And then you notice like stories where things actually don't seem so great, right? So then that's okay. So they may give you this story of something that's supportive and healthy, but it turns out that their children or their families aren't doing as well. So that's a way to decide, what's healthy or not healthy. You look at the end results. So then you have to look at, okay, why does this family hold these examples as valued examples when it looks like the result of that isn't very functional. I try to use functional as opposed to healthy, how functional they are. So that gives you a clue as, okay, maybe I can offer something that's different where they can learn something. It's never a complete one. It's always, is it helpful or is it not helpful? That lets you know where you need to go. But if they do tell stories where the children and the families seem to thrive and seem to be functioning, then you've learned something, and you can build on that. What's the outcome always? Like, what's the result? What's the functionality? Always kind of gives you an idea of if you need to be responsive and notice the competencies within the family, or if there's something you can offer that's new to them.
One thing we see a lot is dismissive style families. So what they'll say is, my parents were amazing, but they can't tell you any examples of of a time where they felt amazing, or it's just kind of this really vague and sometimes exaggerated idea of their perfect family, but then they can't tell you any time that they really felt connected.
Right.
That's one thing that we come across, but
Bless you.
but in the way that they'll describe it.
Right.
So then just, I guess, my question would be, like, culturally, how to approach that when you feel like maybe there were some voids there.
Mm-hmm.
So with cultural awareness in mind.
Well, again, I like to look at what the results are and then try to find a match with any cultural values or competence that may exist. So a couple of things come to mind. One is, so the children usually say that, children or adult children?
Adults, yeah, about their families of origin.
Okay. So one way to frame that is asking them, all right, let's say that we're here 30 years later and we're talking to your children now. What are the things that they would say about you as a parent that were really, they could point to that were amazing and wonderful, and have them, again, it's a way to lower defenses and move the spotlight away from them, talk about something else. And a lot of the times the parents can say, wow, I would want them to say this, I would want them that I did this, I want them to do this, and they'll give you examples, and then you can say, and then you can wonder, did those examples, what the parents that they said were amazing, it also showed? Did they do all of those things or not? It's not about catching them, but it's about opening the conversation. So what it does is it opens the conversation to see what was missing or not missing without what you're already doing, directly asking them. Right? So I think that helps open a discussion. It helps open a dialogue. And it also, the other piece is all the things that they say they want their kids to say about them, those cultural values, where did they come from? Why do they believe that? And if their parents didn't do it, where did they see it done before? Probably not just TV. Probably maybe, a community or uncles and aunts maybe, or someone else close where they saw that happening. And try to name those values and those pieces of tradition that they want to hold on to, and why it's important to them. Is that helpful? Is that? Any other questions about that piece? We have like the DSM is very individualistic in its perspective. It has a lot of important things for us to notice, but it's not very relational. There aren't any relational diagnoses, right? You have codependent disorders, but you don't have an independent disorder, right? And I don't mean narcissism, I mean someone that's too independent. It's like in our society, you can't be too independent to where it's unhealthy. Like independence is the thing. That's important to be aware of. It's important to be aware of. It's not a bad thing, but it's important to be aware of, like, wow, there's no end to how independent, but there's definitely, as soon as somebody gets a little too close to someone else, man, we're on it, like, that's unhealthy, or we better watch out. No one ever says, they're too autonomous. They're too, hold on, what's going on? Haven't built, and I'll get to and the same thing is with our general mainstream society about adolescence. Everyone talks about the Erik Erikson, adolescence is about individual identity development. That's a huge part of it, but if you really, and nobody puts these two things together. In the same time in the literature and in your work, what do you talk about of what's important with adolescence? Peers. Nobody sees that contradiction. What adolescents need is what they're searching and they're asking us and they're looking at us to give them examples of is how to connect, how to build connections, how to relate, not how to withdraw. What adolescents need most is a stable, familial base when they're developing. That's what allows that. Well, remember I said we always see the end result? That's what allows us to see the end result of becoming individuals. But what's underneath there is relationship. If they don't have that safe relationship, they can't develop that other part. It's just another half of them. It's not everything they're supposed to be. The relationship building is just as important. So what's a crucial developmental task in adolescence? Individual identity and relationship building is the more accurate perspective. Not just individuating, as Bowen would say, right? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, just what you were saying about how the DSM is very, individual focused and mental health in general. This, idea that trying to be independent is the thing that we're trying for in society as people. And culture is very more of a systems perspective on how do all these things interact. So how do you? I'm trying to actually formulate it within a question. How do you kind of reconcile those two things together?
Mm-hmm.
That the big system that we work in is kind of leaning one way, but being competent in this way is kind of the opposite of that.
My first response is, it's always the danger of talking this way, is to not think of it like that as polar opposites. To always think of things on continuums and levels. I'm a big fan of individualism. I mean, I'm probably more individualistic on those things than I am collectivistic. So it's not that individualism is a bad thing or being, autonomous, and that helps societies run, in a lot of ways. It's being aware of that and being aware that it just is. It's not just like it just is. It's a value, and being aware of always kind of questioning ourselves, like when is that individualistic value coming through? Where I could have different options of looking at things other ways. I could have different hors d'oeuvres to present to clients or to myself in thinking of interventions or thinking of how to talk with families. Is there another way? And if they're really pushing this, what may seem unhealthy codependence automatically or enmeshment or all that stuff, if that seems to really be the case, you always have to be willing to say, all right, what's the healthy functioning that this family is striving for? Like, why is this value important? What is it that they're striving for, but they're not achieving, and it's not functional, right? Because usually the underlying value is similar, usually healthy. And so that's what and then sometimes I'm like, nope, not healthy. We gotta disentangle this. I mean, that can happen too. I mean, it's not like that's never an option, but trying to see things on a continuum. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Did you also have another question or follow-up?
It was similar to his, but I think I was listening to something else, and they were talking about like a horizontal identity that you get from your
Mm-hmm.
parents and the backgrounds that you have, but then like in adolescence especially, you get a vertical identity of like if you are identifying with this group or this group, especially like they were talking about development of disabilities and sexual orientation, because if you are gay and your parents are heterosexual, I mean, probably came from a heterosexual family, like they don't necessarily understand that identity.
Right.
And so kind of what you're talking about, how do you help families where the child has a different vertical identity that the parents aren't understanding, because it's different from theirs?
Well, one of the things that I always try to do is, again, identify what it is that the parents and identify within the child what it is that the parents have given or transmitted or modeled to that child that the vertical identity cannot.